Hello, BookTube. I mentioned last week in this endless melodrama that you're trapped in with me, I mentioned last week that I had tried out a new routine. I'd said for years that I used to have routines that did a whole bunch of things, and then they sort of fell by the wayside until one of you emailed me and sort of politely said, well, why don't you start a new routine? I thought, oh yeah, I could do that. So last week I tried a new routine. And it worked really well. I really enjoyed it. And I looked ahead. I thought, well, the thing about routines is you have to do them over and over again. So I looked ahead, and it looked like a raft of really hot weather was coming to Boston. Prohibitively hot. So mid-90s Fahrenheit. So that the new routine would have to wait. And I told myself, if you start a new routine and you break it 1 week in, what is this, a New Year's Eve resolution? So I was sort of halfway determined to do this new routine on Wednesday anyway. But weirdly enough, today is weather-wise a very brief pocket in an otherwise unbroken stretch of hot weather. Genuinely hot, possibly record-breaking heat weather is coming back tomorrow and staying until next Tuesday. Something like that, where it's high 90s Fahrenheit, low 100s Fahrenheit, just unrelenting sun and heat. A type of thing you probably don't want to push your luck, right? Hundreds of people die of heat stroke in America every year, which is entirely preventable. It's entirely preventable. All you have to do is recognize the signs. We all need to get better at recognizing the signs. We all need to take better precautions against prolonged, serious heat. Don't go out during the day. Keep yourself well hydrated. Wear head covering. Wear loose-fitting, light clothes. That sort of thing. Today was this weird exception, this weird meteorological exception. So I went out and I did my new routine. And one part of that routine that has been gone from my life forever and ever is the comic shop. Wednesday is New Release Comic Book Day in America, and I used to go to the comic shop on New Release Day, whether it was a Friday or a Wednesday or whenever. I used to go religiously and get a pile of floppy issue weekly comics from either Marvel or DC. For years and years and years, there was so much good stuff coming out every week that it was worth my while to go. That doesn't really happen anymore to me, but last week I had such great luck. Last week I bought some collected volumes, which Marvel Comics, and to a lesser extent DC Comics, have realized that there are a whole bunch of fans out there who are older and have some disposable income and will happily buy reprints of the stuff they loved 50 years ago. And Marvel, like I say, much better than DC, has risen to the occasion and has a very robust reprint culture. Something every week, almost. So I thought, well, if I'm going to add the comic shop back to my routine, my comic shop would be Newbury Comics on Newbury Street in Boston. You might have heard me mention Newbury Comics went from trips up to Vermont to visit Mark Richardson and his family. Their Newbury Comics has a great staff. It's a place where you would want to return there anyway because the staff is so friendly and so knowledgeable. And the same thing is true of my Newbury Comics, and a number of you have emailed me in the last week, telling me that the same is true of your Newbury Comics too. I've had dozens of stories of people from their Newbury Comics singing the praises of the staff. Same thing. That's wonderful. I can't help but think that bespeaks a healthy corporate culture when it comes to customer service. But I realized that with this new routine, I could put the comic shop back on my route. So I worked up a whole long list of things that I wanted that had to be specially got into the store, and I latched my claws onto Adam, my guy at my Newbury Comics, who is great at customer service, and who, I think maybe originally he probably thought I was a well-intentioned homeless guy who wandered in off the street and was a little bit boring to talk to. We wore an onion on our belt, which was the style at the time. But he was unfailingly nice about finding me. He and his colleagues were unfailingly nice about finding me things that I wanted, that maybe had to be got special into the shop. And I know from my past experience in retail that if you find someone like that, number one, grab onto them, because they're rare. Except, I guess, at Newbury Comics. And number two, if they're like that with you, they're probably going to be like that with other people. But I had not seen that really demonstrated until today. I probably hadn't, just hadn't paid attention. But today I walked into the store, greeted him, went upstairs to where the new issue comics are, just to browse around. And I was browsing around up there when he went upstairs from the register downstairs, and it was immediately talking with all the other customers. I don't think he even noticed I was up there. He was immediately talking with all the other customers. Hey, how are you? Oh, yes, I can certainly do that for you. How are things going? That sort of thing. It was delightful to see. Absolutely delightful. And we had things set aside for me. So I have new comics to show you, amazingly enough. It doesn't feel right. I have to admit, we had collected volumes set aside for me, and I got both of those. But it doesn't feel right for me to go into a comic shop on New Comic Book Day and not buy an individual issue. That just doesn't feel right to do. We're talking 50 years of doing that. And I was, I'm way behind on all kinds of comics. I haven't been following weekly comics in forever. So buying them is perilous, which is why last week I got all #1s. I got all first issues, so that I'd at least be starting at relatively ground zero with them. And there was one first issue there today on the new release stand. DC Comics is giving Mary Marvel her own ongoing comic. It's not called Mary Marvel. I don't know that DC is allowed to call it Mary Marvel. Instead, it's called, I think, The Power of Shazam or something like that. And Mary Marvel, 70, 80 years ago, when Captain Marvel took off and was tremendously popular, outsold Superman. Captain Marvel was the superpowered alternate identity of the young orphan Billy Batson, who said a magic word, Shazam, and became Captain Marvel, who had Superman powers and all sorts of great adventures. Captain Marvel adventures are fun to read. And they were so popular that the people behind them, the guys behind them, this was before DC Comics was officially called that, and Fawcett Comics, before they were officially called that, they decided, well, if Captain Marvel is popular, let's give the people more of what they want. So they introduced a whole bunch of other Marvels. A whole bunch of them. I've gone on this channel many times about Captain Marvel Jr., a crippled orphan named Freddie Freeman, who can transform into Captain Marvel Jr. I've mentioned before on this channel, to the two of you who watch my comic book videos, how odd Captain Marvel Jr. is. Not only because he doesn't say Shazam, he says Captain Marvel in order to transform into Captain Marvel Jr., which means he's the only superhero in the world who can't say his own name to onlookers. If he saves a bus full of nuns and they say, oh my God, who are you? He can't introduce himself or he'll accidentally transform back into Freddie Freeman. Not only that, but also Freddie Freeman does not change into an adult Captain Marvel. Billy Batson, when he says Shazam, turns into an adult man. Freddie Freeman turns into a super powerful, invulnerable, super strong, leotard-clad version of himself. Freddie Freeman is a cripple. He has a crutch. He lives in a shack down by the river. He sells papers for pennies a week. Captain Marvel Jr. can fly. He's invulnerable. He's not a cripple, and as far as we know, he doesn't need to eat or breathe. Why, I've asked many times over the decades, would Freddie Freeman ever turn back? Why would he ever transform back out of Captain Marvel Jr.? Why wouldn't he just stay that way? If he's so in love with selling papers, he could put on mortal clothes, but still be Captain Marvel Jr. Why would he do that? No explanation is ever given, but the writers also decided to give Billy Batson a sister, Mary Batson, and to give her Captain Marvel powers. Now, keep in mind, I want to stress something here. I won't get too old-timey radio, but when Mary Batson says Shazam and turns into Mary Marvel, she becomes Captain Marvel level powerful. And this was a long time before there was a Supergirl. So you suddenly have a comic book where this girl with her red and yellow skirt is flying, lifting trains, plugging volcanoes with giant boulders, socking all of the male bad guys into the middle of next week. It's pretty remarkable stuff. But when I thought about Mary Marvel having her own comic in 2022, you can guess what I worried about, right? Which is that it would be down with the patriarchy, all men are terrible. I've always been Captain Marvel. There's never been a male Captain Marvel. Didn't you know that? Didn't you notice that? Maybe she's lesbian. Probably there'll be pressure along those lines. But also that the modern crop of Marvel of superhero comic book writers will have cutesy animal humor, cutesy pet or cat humor, and tons of time wasted on the characters either eating food or talking about eating food. I have no idea where this comes from, but it is everywhere in Marvel Comics. And I figured, I'd be running that risk. I was a big fan of Mary Marvel, the whole Marvel family. Captain Marvel Jr., perhaps most of all. Can't imagine why. But I was a big fan of the original Marvel family, and I would have gone along quite well with a Mary Marvel comic at #1, but not this. All the alarm bells, all the Twitter blue checkmark alarm bells were ringing. So I decided to leave it. I decided not to try it. I decided just to let it go. But I did get a floppy issue. A while ago, I think it might have been up in Vermont, that I showed you. Spider-Man was relaunched. A new volume of Spider-Man was relaunched with a #1, with artwork by John Romita Jr., who is the son of John Romita Sr., the great Marvel artist who really set the visual template for Spider-Man 50 years ago. I never missed an issue of Spider-Man that was written by Stan Lee and drawn by John Romita Sr., even though half of those issues were devoted to teen romance and kids doing the jitterbug. I knew that ahead of time. Even though I knew that ahead of time, I still never missed an issue for John Romita Sr.'s artwork. And then, in the nature of things, the birds and the bees being what they are, he had a son. And his son was a heck of a nice guy 40 years ago in Iowa City. And became an artist, and eventually, fanhood's dream come true, started drawing Spider-Man. He does a really good Spider-Man, very different from his father's. Very surreal, the few Spider-Man appearances from decades ago, where John Romita Jr. did the pencils, and John Romita Sr. did the inks. Quite an amazing feeling, and I think unparalleled in comic books. Something like that, I think, is probably unparalleled in comic books. And Spider-Man had a #1 issue, and I got it, and it was very intriguing. It's written by Zeb Wells, who's not an author that I know. And the first issue of Spider-Man, of this new volume of Spider-Man, takes place an undisclosed amount of time in the future when something has happened to alienate Spider-Man from all of his friends, to alienate Peter Parker from his own life. We don't really know what it is. We're piecing together the pieces of the puzzle until the big reveal. You're just supposed to start guessing what happened. Something has happened to dim Peter Parker's heroism, his upbeat optimism. Very much so. I read that first issue, I really liked it, and I missed issue #2. I didn't think that the comic shop was back on my route until I got a boot in the pants. I didn't think that. So I didn't have it back on my route, so I missed issue #2. But I got issue #3 today. There is the rather depressing cover by John Romita Jr. We have his pencils all throughout. Unfortunately, the issue in Spider-Man is shackled and helpless at the mercy of the villains throughout the whole of the issue. They beat on him, they slug him, they punch him, they demoralize him, and he tells them in a desperate panel. He says, "I've learned my lesson. I've learned my lesson." Which seems almost a hint that he's learned his lesson that by-the-numbers do-gooding is worthless, or that he's not doing it anymore. I don't know what that story is. I figured if I was only missing one issue, I probably wouldn't miss that much. And this issue was very compelling. It stars a villain named Tombstone, who here is given a pathological backstory, poor picked-on kid. The virus of Stan Lee. I don't want my villains to be psychologically insightful. I don't want them to have conflicted motives. I want them to be bad guys, preferably bald, and I want them ending up in jail, grumbling at the end of one issue. Or making bad puns at the top of a giant mechanical penguin. Okay? But anyway, I'm never getting those days back, so I might as well stop bellyaching about them. There is a subplot here. I'm not quite sure what's going on. These two young women are having a discussion at a table, and one of them proposes to the other. Not really sure what's going on there, and it's a cliffhanger of an ending. Young Adam has done so many favors for me. He's been so good to me as a comic book store guy. that I hesitate to ask him if he can find me a copy of issue number 2. Especially since if the whole of this story is drawn by John Romita Jr., I'll probably get the trade when it comes out. I say if because what usually happens is that artist and writer teams or high-profile fan, our favorite artists like John Romita Jr., are brought onto a relaunch like this kicking and screaming, and they no sooner fulfill the bare minimum of their contract than they're gone. And some, Joe Schmo is brought in to replace them. So I don't know if John Romita Jr. is going to get through the whole of this arc. I'd like to know what it was that happened in Spider-Man's life. I admit that it's somewhat of a tired old plot gimmick, but it works. I am hooked. I want to know. So that was the floppy issue that I bought. And sometime later today or tonight or something or other, I will look. There are websites where you can look ahead to the floppy issues that are coming next week and see if maybe something tickles my fancy then. But I also got collected volumes that I know I like, because I bought these things as floppy issues 50 years ago. Also, I know that I like them. And they are both Epic collections, which is Marvel's full-color reprint line. It's a really good line of reprints. It's not as expensive. It's half the price of their Marvel Masterworks series, which is also ongoing. And unlike the Marvel Masterworks series, it's not strictly chronological. It bounces all around in the length of whatever title. So, for instance, Spider-Man. There are many Spider-Man Epic volumes, and they bounce all around. They're not going in strict chronological order. And the Epic collections might be familiar to some of you, the two of you who watch my comic book videos, because Michael K. Vaughan and I, over on his channel, we do a collaboration every week, and we call it Epic Comic Book Wednesday because it started out just us talking about Epic collections. So are these two Epic collections a further step in my goal of amassing a collection of Epic collections to rival the size of Michael K. Vaughan's? No, they're not, because nothing could rival the size of his Epic collection. But these two really appealed, so I grabbed both of them. One is new, came out today in comic shops, and the other is not. The older one is this, Queen of the Black Coast, Conan the Barbarian, with writing by Roy Thomas and artwork all throughout by John Buscema. These issues all feature the time in Conan's life when he was a corsair under the nominal command of Baylit, the pirate queen of the Black Coast. And this has a ton of great adventures that I have read and reread my issues here. They've just been falling apart. The first issue in this collection is from Savage Sword of Conan #1. So it's the only thing in here that's not colored. The Savage Sword of Conan #1 was black and white, and it featured a full-length adventure of Conan teaming up with Red Sonja. It was a Roy Thomas, basically a Roy Thomas creation, and a very popular one. And then it follows that up with a 2-part color adventure that Conan and Red Sonja have together. That's also really, really good. Little bit weirder, but terrifically good. Just amazing, amazing fun. And then it moves on from there. I understand that's the Queen of the Black Coast, so I understand that's the cover that you have to use here, but that is not a good cover. I don't know what's happening to Baylit. I think the cover catches her in the act of stumbling on the stairs. This is a much better cover, but of course it doesn't have anything to do with the title of the book. Although, last week we saw, what was it, Moon of the Man-Wolf, something like that, a Spider-Man Epic collection that doesn't have Man-Wolf on the cover, so who knows. But the point is, I have these individual issues that are falling apart and have Cheez-It dust on every page and whatnot. And I have a couple of, I think I have most of these electronically, but to have it in a book like this, I wasn't about to pass that up. So that was the older one, and then the new one that came out today was this, the Avengers Kang War, which is not just, it starts off with the Celestial Madonna saga, which took place over many Avengers issues and 2 annuals. The annuals were bigger issues. They came out once a year, as the name indicates. They were more expensive, and they tended to be self-contained big stories. But the writer here, as you can see, it's Steve Englehart, with a lot of artwork here. Try to ignore George Chuska's name on there, and Don Heck. But most of this is Sal Buscema and also Dave Cockrum, before he went on to the X-Men. And Englehart decided to stretch his story about the Celestial Madonna through a couple of annuals as well. So Kang is all over this book, a big, healthy size thing. And one of the nice things about the Epic collections is that you get tons of extras. This includes all kinds of house ads that appeared in the comics but have never been reprinted anywhere else. You get the front and back cover of the giant Treasury edition of the Avengers. Just terrific stuff there, where you get Jack Kirby came back to Marvel Comics. He illustrated the front cover and then scandalously illustrated the back cover without Captain America, his own creation. And there are other, yes, we get, he even includes the table of contents for that Treasury edition, which is all just clip art from other artists, but you never see it otherwise. I have that Treasury edition. This also includes long articles about the Scarlet Witch and the Vision from Foom, Friends of Old Marvel, the fan magazine that Marvel did for a while. And that is just terrific. That is so much fun. And this collection starts off with an issue called Bid Tomorrow Goodbye. And there is Kang confronting the Avengers. And that old woman is Agatha Harkness. She doesn't look like the Agatha Harkness in the horrible WandaVision TV show, but that is Agatha Harkness. And the story of the Celestial Madonna is that Kang is in search of a wife. He is hoping, there is a rumor, there is a myth, that the son of the Celestial Madonna will rule the universe. So Kang is kind of hoping to be the father of that son, and he's trying to find the Celestial Madonna, and he assumes that it is one of the Avengers. Either Agatha Harkness, who's like 150 years old, or the Scarlet Witch, or Mantis. And Mantis here is not anything like the character that you see in the Guardians of the Galaxy, so you just have to put that out of your mind. And Kang goes hunting for this potential bride. And along the way, he employs the Legion of the Damned, dead superheroes. So you have Frankenstein's monster, who's technically not alive. You have the original Human Torch, who is technically not alive. He's an android. I guess Frankenstein's monster is a kind of android too. But you also have characters here who are, as far as continuity at the time went, dead. Like Wonder Man, a synthetic Avenger that we think is dead when this story starts. And in the course of events, I want to get to the right period. In the course of events, the Vision is badly wounded while the Avengers are fighting these cat's paws of Kang the Conqueror. But Iron Man appears to die. He appears to be dead. The original Human Torch appears to kill him, which would certainly have happened. Okay, I know I'm a little bit prejudiced in favor of the World War II era heroes, but the original Human Torch wasn't some punk kid on the Fantastic Four. He was a full-grown, superpowered android. His flame powers would have been considerably more formidable than Johnny Storm's. But when Thor finds Iron Man dead, he vows vengeance on Kang the Conqueror. Not on the cat's paw that killed Iron Man, but on Kang himself. Thor vows vengeance and eventually attacks Kang. Kang has a force field, but Thor doesn't care. He's enraged. And once he deals with Wonder Man, which he does fairly easily, he chases after Kang and is only thwarted by a landslide, which drives him crazy, and which introduces an element to this ongoing storyline that is really arresting. You won't think of it now. When you look back at these issues, you won't think that it's anything to note. But I noted it at the time, back in the 1970s, and I thought it was remarkable. Because Thor is not saying that he wants to hunt down Kang in order to turn him over to the authorities. Thor is saying, you killed my friend, I intend to kill you. Not in some theoretical future date. You're at the end of this hallway. I'm charging towards you because I'm going to smash your head open with my hammer. I'm going to murder you. Which superheroes don't do. Avengers certainly don't do. No one thinks of it. No one thinks anything of it. And Thor doesn't care whether or not he kills everybody else in the process. He only wants vengeance on Kang. We're told that, he's fighting Kang again. And we're told truly Kang would die here and now, and with him perhaps all the Avengers beneath Thor's berserker rage. But instead he slips into the time stream and eludes Thor. I remember reading that panel and just being struck by, wait, you're saying that Thor would have killed all of his friends and wouldn't have even noticed? And his friends don't seem to mind? And once again, later on in an annual, he fights Kang again. And in this encounter, simply beats Kang. Kang uses 41st century technology on Thor, and it doesn't work. Thor, this is Don Heck artwork. It's not his best work. And Thor eventually just overcomes Kang's force field and knocks him unconscious. And then decides. He actually has a moment where he deliberates. Imagine seeing this in a superhero comic book still aimed largely at a children audience. Kang says, so now I may finally fulfill my vow as Avenger for Iron Man's death at thy hands. And yet, Immortus did return my friend to the land of the living. Mayhap the need to avenge his death has now died in his stead. So Thor is pondering the unconscious Kang and thinking, oh, maybe I don't have to kill you. Maybe I don't have to kill you. But it's not done. They're not done. Because after this, there's a storyline that intervenes here that was drawn by George Tuska that is just plain weird. It's just a really dumb storyline. But eventually we get back to the normal course of things. And once again, the Avengers are fighting Kang the Conqueror. Only this time they're doing it back in the past, in the Old West. Where Kang lures them, Hawkeye, the Two-Gun Kid, Moondragon, and a bearded man in a hat. He lures them to his hideout where they face a gigantic mutated coyote. And they have barely any superpowers between them. So it looks like it's not going to be much of a fight. Kang is triumphing, not realizing that the bearded man in the hat is standing right behind him until it's too late. At which point Kang says, the two real Avengers are finished. The masked cowboy is mere moments from his end, and the bearded stranger... Eh? Where is the bearded stranger? My scanner doesn't pick him up anywhere. Wait! There's a hole in the far wall, a gaping hole. It can only have been made by someone with extraordinary strength to escape. No, it cannot be. And Don Blake slams his walking stick on the ground and says, yes, it is. It's Thor. And I'm going to settle things. He hits Kang. Kang has a force field. Kang says, surely you haven't forgotten my ever-present force field. And Thor says, I have not forgotten it. Not at all. He blasts Kang out of his citadel. Because although he can't penetrate the force field moves when Kang moves and vice versa. And Kang hits the ground. Thor flies down, puts his hammer in his belt. So no weapons. I'm not going to use my weapon. I'm going to use my bare fist. And says, now, neath the open skies, thou and I, hand to hand, shall settle thy fate once and for all. And that's all it is. Thor is just going to pound the living snot out of Kang. And that is wonderful. To reread all of that is wonderful. That's what you get in these epic collections. Look at the extras you get in this Conan thing. There's a pinup by Barry Windsor Smith that, as you can tell, was made for a Marvel calendar, where these artists did original artwork for these Marvel calendars. There you have a page from the Marvel calendar. But they did original artwork. I had those Marvel calendars. Every year I would get them. This has the cover artwork for the Conan Treasure Edition and also the raw artwork without the cover stuff. Look at that. Just incredible. How wonderful to include that. So what I'm trying to say is you get your money's worth with these epic collections. Now, will Michael K. Vaughan and I ever get to these two epic collections? Well, we won't be doing it in August, that's for sure, because August is for garbage comics. And Michael K. Vaughan has a lot of those. So I should consider myself lucky that it's just 1 month of garbage that he's dragging me through. But that was my trip to the comic shop. How great is that? Now, I don't remember whether or not... Adam has the whole list of things that I want, and I don't remember if there's anything next week. So there might not be any big collection next week, but it also might be 115 degrees Fahrenheit next week. I might have to postpone this new routine anyway. If it's just hot enough to boil an egg on the sidewalk, I'm not going to go to Newbury Comics. But if it's not, if it's reasonable, I will go. And if there's no collection that I have asked for ahead of time from poor, long-suffering Adam, then I'll find something to get. And I'll look at the single issues that came out that week, and I'll report back as we continue this trend. So, weekly comic book videos. You're now getting 2 of them. Aren't you lucky? Thank you, BookTube.